Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about The Eternals. The Eternals is the newest movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it is directed by Chloe Zhao, who has done nothing of note. I don't know where Marvel is finding all these directors who've done nothing to direct all of their newer movies and TV shows, but I'm kind of getting tired of it. The Eternals does not follow one specific person, but instead an entire group of superpowered individuals, and tries to introduce them into the MCU in a way that allows for them to use them in future movies, while also pretending that they were on Earth the entire time. But this movie tries to serve as a backstory to their upbringing as well as their justification for being on Earth and what's expected to come in the future involving their characters. With big name actors like Kit Harington, Angelina Jolie, Richard Madden, and Salma Hayek, The Eternals seem to be an exciting continuation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 5. So I was excited to check it out and see what we're in store for in the future. So without further ado, let's get into the 6 things that make a movie great. 1. The plot. And we're starting off weak. The plot of this movie is convoluted. And that's because Marvel is trying to introduce an entire cast of characters, say that they were here the whole time, and justify their existence now, while trying to create a story and have antagonists and protagonists, and it just ends up being convoluted. But I'll do my best to try and explain it. Essentially, the Eternals were placed on Earth by a celestial known as Arishem, basically a god of the MCU, to protect the planet and its inhabitants, specifically from deviants. Deviants are basically these magical rainbow creatures that go around killing people, and so the Eternals were placed on the Earth to protect both Earth and its people from these deviants by the celestial known as Arishem. There's a lot of names dropping left and right, and it's kind of hard to follow. A lot of the fights that the Eternals had with deviants happened way back in the day, way back in history. And after a while, they thought they had killed all of the deviants. Well, now it's been a few centuries at least, and they're kind of in the present day wondering, why are we here? What's our mission here? Why hasn't Arishem asked us to go do another mission? Like, why are we here? As the plot progresses, the Eternals begin to find out more about their own upbringing. They find out that the deviants have come back, and they start to realize that maybe things are not what they originally thought about why they're here on Earth and why they're here protecting these people. But unfortunately, I think the plot suffers from the fact that Marvel's trying to do way too much in this movie. It'd be like trying to introduce all of the Avengers in one film, try to give them all screen time, and have a solid plot that makes you feel something at the end of the movie, and none of that happens in this. While the Eternals reference the Avengers in this movie and just say, oh well, you know, we couldn't interfere because Arishem told us that we're here to protect the Earth from being destroyed and protect humans, but we can't interfere in human affairs. That, you know, it has to sort itself out. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and believed it for a second. And then I looked back and was like, wait, Thanos wiped out half of the population. Ultron, they would have destroyed the entire Earth. And they weren't there either. Not buying it. And because of this continuity error and all the things they're trying to do, the plot suffers and you lose sight of protagonists and antagonists. This movie's almost 3 hours long, and you never really feel like the plot takes you to a good place that makes sense in the MCU. So while the bare bones of the plot are decent for a movie that with context, this one's kind of just out of nowhere, and I feel like the plot's lost in the midst of everything else they're trying to do. So the plot gets a thumbs down. 2 is family friendliness. This movie's rated PG-13, and I think it stays within those parameters. There's violence in this movie, there's some scary sequences. Some of the creatures, the deviants, can be a little frightening, but this movie's pretty tame. This movie does tackle some interesting concepts about humanity and life in general, but it doesn't really dive into the dark parts of the mind that it could have. Hello there, Future Peter here. I totally forgot that there's a sex scene in this movie. While there's no nudity and it stays within the PG-13 rating, it still feels like a little bit more intimate than most PG-13 sex scenes. But because of that, along with the other factors, family friendliness actually gets a 50-50. 3 is acting and script. Like I said, this movie has a lot of great actors and actresses in it, but none of them get enough screen time for you to really feel like you know them and understand with them and sympathize with them. Objectively, the acting is good. Angelina Jolie does a great job as Thena. Gemma Chan does a good job as Cersei. But in the midst of all of these actors and actresses, the ones that stood out to me were Don Lee as Gilgamesh and Lauren Ridloff as Makari. Every time they were on screen, they were really involved, and their acting made you engage and you were just in the film. This movie really tried to make Kumail Nanjiani the funny character, but he really wasn't funny, and he was standing in the shadow of his helper, Karun, played by Harish Patel. Oh my gosh, every time Karun delivered a line or was on scene, he was so freaking funny. Everyone else did a decent job in the film, but those were the ones that made me the most happy. The script of this movie really needed some work. I already addressed my issue with the fact that they try to just brush off that the Eternals have always been here, but we've never seen them in any MCU films, including world-ending Avenger movies. But you also don't see any Avengers in this movie either, and it kind of makes you just like, okay, you were just saying that. They also decide to change some source material to check boxes.
Would you want to explain that statement?
No.
Well, could you explain that statement?
I meant what I said.
But my biggest issue isn't with that. I think trying to shoehorn this movie into the MCU so that you can just use the characters and not taking the time to build them into the universe, I think it's lazy writing. So overall, acting gets a thumbs up, script gets a thumbs down, so 50-50. 4 is character development. The vibe that I got from this movie was that Cersei is the main character. However, every time I started getting that feeling that I was like, oh, finally I can latch on to this main protagonist and start enjoying the movie and identifying. There was another character that came in and they're focused on somebody else or some other thing, and it was like they were juggling too much. You don't have this issue with the Avengers because you have their solo films or joint films where you get all that character development to the point when you bring the Avengers together, you don't feel like one or the other is lacking. But in this movie, it really struggled to find a protagonist and an antagonist. I feel like as the movie progresses, you just discover more antagonists, and it's more of that whole, are they a hero? Are they a villain? Are they in the middle? Are they just misunderstood? And I've talked about that before. But I want to say some of the best character development that you really get is with Drigg. Every one of these Eternals has cool powers and abilities, but his is the ability to control minds, and he has to ask himself some pretty important questions about what he can and can't do. And he does a great job of acting that part out, and they develop that part pretty well in the film. But there was something about the depth that they go with his specific character that resonated with me, whereas everyone else was just kind of like, alright. But the thing is that he's not even the main protagonist. And so it was unfortunate, but I don't know what they were expecting with a movie like this, except for maybe a paycheck. So character development gets a thumbs down. 5 is CG. I have to give it to Marvel. Some of the CG looked better in this movie than in previous films that I've seen more recently. The monster CG looked good, the magic CG looked good. So I was happy with what I saw in this film. Overall, CG gets a thumbs up. And finally, 6 is rewatchability. Looking back at Marvel movies that we've watched before, pre-Endgame, you enjoy watching most of them. There's at least one that I wouldn't watch. Again, Captain Marvel. But for the most part, you enjoy watching those MCU movies. There's a bit of nostalgia, but they all have really good character development, a good plot, good moral values, and some moral questions that come into play throughout the films. This movie really feels like they were just like, we want the Eternals to be in the MCU. We don't want to put in the work to build the world around them. So we're just going to shoehorn in a movie and see what people think. And that's pretty much what they got. You arrive at the end of the movie and you're like, okay, this movie was pretty much a waste of time. And they introduced 2 or 3 characters at the very end of the film that will be relevant to the MCU, but everything else is irrelevant. This movie really felt like a waste of time. They could have done it better, and I don't think I'll ever go back and watch it. This is a movie that you could literally Google the synopsis, find out which characters are important and what it means to the MCU, and you move on with your life, and you save yourself 3 hours. So overall, rewatchability gets a thumbs down. You need to develop the story more. You need to develop characters more. And I understand it's difficult working with a big cast, a big team like the Eternals, but there's gotta be a different way to do it. So adding in some of the excitement from a couple of the characters they introduced at the end of the film, I have to give the Eternals a 5.5 out of 10. There's some cool action sequences, there's some funny lines delivered, there's some cool characters, but none of them are developed enough for you to really care. And by the end of the film, it seems like it was a waste of time. So if you're looking for a movie to throw on in the background that's Marvel related, maybe this is the one for you. But other than that, I would not spend your time watching this movie. Either way, you already know that I'm a sucker for Marvel and I'm going to watch those movies anyway, regardless of how much they suck. Thank you so much for watching. If you've seen The Eternals, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. I appreciate all your love and support, and as always, I'll catch you guys and gals in the next one. There is one spoiler-centered thing that I wanted to mention as well, so if you haven't seen the movie and you want to, go watch it and don't watch this part yet. In the movie, there's a subplot involving Sprite, who's stuck in the form of a child instead of being an adult like the rest of the Eternals. Near the end of the movie, Cersei says, "I have enough power to turn you into a human. You'll age and grow old and stuff, but you'll be human and get to experience that." And my question was, if she has enough power to turn Sprite into a human child, why not be able to turn her into an adult Eternal? That was just a thought I had.